Hello, everyone. We're just going to take a couple more minutes while more people are hopping on. Thank you. Hello, everyone. If you're just now hopping on, we're going to wait one more minute while more people are hopping on. Welcome to the Native American Agriculture Fund's 2024 Request for Applications webinar. So how to ask questions. We ask that you submit all of your questions via the question and answer box or through the chat feature below. We will do our best to answer all the questions in the time allotted, but we will have additional resources provided after this webinar in the form of a recording and to answer any of your follow-up questions. We also ask that if you have any questions after this webinar, to send them to grants@nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. Up next, I will go ahead and hand it to our Director of Communications and Policy, Whitney Sawney.
Okay, thank you for joining us for our 2024 Requests for Applications webinar. So I want to provide a little bit more information and background knowledge about the Native American Agriculture Fund. So NAAF is a private drawdown trust fund, and we are here today to talk about our grant-making process. Our mission at NAAF is to support Native American farmers and ranchers for the advancement of agriculture through business assistance, agricultural education, technical support, and advocacy services. We are focused on healthy lands, healthy people, and healthy economies, ultimately investing in work that finds solutions to challenges that Native American farmers and ranchers face to increase access to capital for Native American producers. So now some more historic background about how NAAF came to be. We're derived from a class action litigation at Keepsicle v. Vilsack, where claims were settled based on Native American farmers and ranchers and their lack of access to credit and credit servicing. Keepsicle was similar to other class actions at the time, and that was with Black farmers, Hispanic farmers, and female farmers. Keepsicle was based on Native American farmers and ranchers that attempted to get loans from the U.S. Department of Agriculture or may have experienced poor loan servicing and violations under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, dating all the way back to the early 1980s. So for decades, many of the class representatives and their counsel worked tirelessly on this, and they ultimately were able to get the department to settle $680 million in damages. That claims process resulted in approved claims for more than 3,600 Native farmers and ranchers. Beyond these settlement agreements, there were other things that the USDA promised to do as a result of the class action, and that included debt relief up to $80 million. For some producers, that debt forgiveness was one of the most important pieces because they wanted their land free and clear of debt. So as a part of the settlement agreement, a cypre fund was created to go towards eliminating or reducing the original harms of the claimants. After a significant period of negotiation, but prior to NAAF's creation, there was another process that occurred, and that was called the fast track. The fast track process occurred when $38 million was distributed immediately to entities that were serving and supporting Native American farmers and ranchers. Many of those fast track grantees have continued the work in the space of Native agriculture and have now become grantees of NAAF. In 2018, the court directed that the remaining funds be distributed to the newly created Native American Agriculture Fund. So that's what we're doing here today in our grant making process. NAAF was established with $266 million, and NAAF's work is governed by a trust agreement to distribute its funds over a period of 20 years. So NAAF will provide eligible grants to eligible entities. And on the next slide, we'll go into a little bit more of our mission areas. So our mission is to provide business assistance, agricultural education, technical support, and advocacy services to Native American farmers and ranchers to support and promote their continued engagement in agriculture. And the next slide, we'll see that our eligible entities include 501c3 organizations, educational organizations, CDFIs, or community development financial institutions, and their tribal governments. Here you can see a map where our grantees are. And from 2019 to 2023, NAAF has funded $67 million in grants to tribes, nonprofits, educational institutions, and those CDFIs I mentioned, which are our eligible entities. Some of the states that we've funded the most projects in include South Dakota, New Mexico, and Montana. But compared to the map below it, you can see where Native producers are relative to where we have funded grants in the past. And the map on the bottom, you can see that the states with the most Native producers include Arizona, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. These numbers actually come from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. There have been new data sets released through the USDA National Agriculture Statistics Service and their 2022 Census of Agriculture data. Through that data, we have seen that the number of producers have actually decreased from 2017 to 2022. However, we have seen that a lot of other areas have increased for Native producers and Native agricultural production, including economic impact. So in 2017, we had about $3.5 billion in annual production value for agriculture, but that nearly doubled to more than $6 billion annually. So we'll see a lot of those numbers specific to reservations that will be released in August. But if you're using some of the Census of Agriculture data, we encourage you to utilize that as a resource. We do understand that it has its limitations in fully capturing the full picture of agriculture in Indian country, but it is a useful tool for you, and also encouraging producers in your areas to participate in the census, because those data sets are used to provide information for different decisions, such as budget appropriations or different allocations of funding from different organizations when it comes to funding agriculture. So next, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Program, Chanel Ford.
Thank you, Whitney, for that wonderful overview, and thank you, Gabby. Welcome all to our 2024 RFA discussion. I'm going to go over eligible entities and some of our application process for this year. You will know if you have been a prior grantee or if you've filled out an application with us before. Some things have changed, but some have remained the same. So eligible entities, we have 501c3 organizations, educational organizations, community development financial institutions, and tribes and their instrumentalities. So as Whitney shared, we really are focusing on reducing the harms that our claimants faced when going through the Keep Siegel v. Vilsack litigation. And so our focus, we want the focus of these projects to be geared towards agriculture. And I'll share a little bit more about some of the prior projects we have funded in the past to give you a better bird's eye view if you're applying through your specific entity, what we look to fund. All right, so important notice. I just shared with you all a few things have changed this year within our 2024 RFA. So to ensure accountability and timely reporting, existing grantees who are not in compliance, such as those behind on quarterly, annual, and final reporting and updates relating to past grant awards and projects, will be ineligible to apply for 2024 funding. This is new for 2024, and we are working diligently to make sure that all of our prior grantees are in good standing, they are in compliance, and they are caught up on all outstanding reports if they have any outstanding reports. So please feel free to reach out if you are a current grantee and if this will impact you. Please feel free to reach out to your point of contact. Each entity has their own point of contact. Graham Gator leads the CDFI and the 501c3 inbox. Cindy Farley and myself, Chanel Ford, we lead the Tribes inbox, and Dr. Joe Graham and Riley Dizitel lead the EduOrg inbox. So please feel free to reach out to your POCs, send a direct message to that inbox, and request assistance if it is needed. Also noting, this is important for fiscal sponsors. So we encourage startup nonprofit organizations that have applied for your 501c3 status from the IRS, but not yet received a favorable determination, to apply through a fiscal sponsor who can also provide the important tech support for proposed project activities. If fiscal sponsors are used, the fiscal sponsor must be an eligible 501c3 organization and should follow the guidance in our fiscal sponsor information. So the awesome note I want to point out here is when you go through our application process, we have documents listed that are very specific if you are to be utilizing a fiscal sponsor. So please refer back to that. We also have information on our website. There are some questions we've answered in the past regarding this in our FAQ page, but we are also happy to answer any questions that you might have. Send all questions forward to the grants@nativeamericanagriculturefund.org, and we will get those answered for you. So just to note, the relationship between grantees and the fiscal sponsor is not managed by NAAF, and it's the sole responsibility of the grantee. So if you so choose to apply for the funding through a fiscal sponsor, know that we will not be able to step in if there are any communication issues, if there are any funneling issues. That is to be discussed and taken care of between you and the fiscal sponsor. All right, so we're going to go through a few of these bullets here: addressing access to capital, allowable use of funds, cost sharing or matching funds, cooperators leveraging, limitation on indirect costs, eligibility of previous grantees, allowable use of funds, and then initial review on eligibility. So access to capital, as Whitney shared to start, this was at the core of the Keep Siegel case. This is something that we look at when we are reviewing incoming applications, incoming projects, and programming. We want to know how you will be planning to increase access to capital. And a conversation on access to capital is available on our website if you would like a little bit of more information on how to really show the impact in your grant application. Applications that don't address access to capital will not be funded in 2024, and I will go over our scaling on our applications and what our guidelines are for grading each application. All right, so this is for the 501c3 organization. If you plan to apply for our NAAF funding 2024 and you have a targeted project, the available pool is $1 million. The minimum that we ask you to put into your project or programming is $100,000, with the maximum amount being $200,000. And we're really focusing here on business assistance, ag education, tech support, and/or advocacy services. So when you go through the application, it will ask you how you are applying for the funding. Are you a 501c3? Are you an EduOrg? Are you a CFI? Are you a tribe or instrumentality? Each one of whichever entity you select to apply for our funding for will direct you specifically we'll direct you through the application and have questions that apply to you. Some questions might apply to other entities that will not apply to you. If you're applying through a 501c3, your application may look different than a tribe. It may look different than a CDFI. So I do want to note here, each year we have special focus, special emphasis categories. This year, 501c3s, tribes, edu-orgs are able to apply for the climate and regenerative agricultural practices special emphasis category. So if you choose to apply for our general funding, but you also have a unique project that differs, that matches up with the climate and regenerative agricultural practices, you can then in turn apply for both. So long as the applications do not mirror each other, they are not identical, you can leverage your funding and potentially be awarded in both of these areas. So the available pool for the special focus category is $1 million. The minimum amount is $100,000. The maximum amount you can request is $200,000. So just to share a little bit about a prior 501c3 that is they still are a current grantee of ours. They chose to build a climate data portal on an online native land information system to house data critical to building resilience to climate change. So very unique project that is impacting pretty much all producers and any entity that is looking for information regarding climate throughout Indian country. So that is Village Earth, and they're based out of Colorado. So as I'll share in the other, when we go forth through the other entities, no application we've seen has typically been the same. So agriculture might look different in your community, and your project might look different in your region. So this project obviously is impacting widespread throughout the country, impacting agriculture in different facets. But yours might be very specific just to your region and just to your area, and we encourage that as well. All right, another targeted project, we have educational organizations. The educational organization available pool is $500,000. The minimum amount we ask that you put into your programming project is $75,000. The maximum amount you can ask for, you can request, is $150,000. Again, we are asking that you focus projects on business assistance, ag education, technical support, and/or advocacy services. As I shared previously, this entity also is available to apply for climate and regenerative agriculture practices. This is a special emphasis category. The available pool is $1 million. The minimum amount is $100,000. The maximum amount you can request is $200,000. Sharing a little bit about two previous grantees, or two current grantees, but had applied in previous years of funding. We have United Tribes Technical College out of North Dakota. They are utilizing funds to design and build a greenhouse for their Sustainable Ag and Food Systems program. And then we have Star School that is located in Arizona. They are choosing to utilize the funding to implement a livestock club to teach their students how to raise sheep and cattle, how to care for them, how the butchering process works. And they're also integrating agriculture and education into their classroom. So I said earlier, your projects can look different, they can be different, it can be nationwide impact, it can be your regional impact, as long as it's tying back to agriculture and production, then we are really excited to read through the applications and hopefully get y'all some funding. So educational organization reminders, if you are applying for our funding as an educational institution, this covers all those under sections 170 of the IRS code, including K through 12 and post-secondary institutions, such as TCUs, tribal colleges and universities, Native Americans serving non-tribal institutions, and other institutions must have history and experience in serving Native farmers and ranchers, and Bureau of Indian Education, BIE schools. Further recommendations for TEP involvement required at universities with agents. I'll go into a little bit more about, I believe, our connection with BIE schools here on the next slide. So we are interested in investing in programs that provide information and guidance to Native youth that are interested in choosing food and ag as their future career choice, as well as specifically reaching out to Native students who attend these specific schools. For the first time, we are really excited to announce that Bureau of Indian Education, BIE schools, will be allowed to apply for funding. So I shared at the start, there might be some changes, new additions to this year's round of funding, and this is one of them. So if you have questions about this, please feel free to reach out to our grants at email, and we'll provide feedback and comments to you. All right, getting back into our targeted projects. So if you are going to be applying for funding as a CDFI, the available pool is 4.5 million this year. There's no minimum, but you cannot request the full available pool. So you will not be able to submit a budget that is $4.5 million in requested amount of funding. The special focus area for our CFIs is the climate and regenerative agriculture practices that I mentioned that goes along with the 501c3s, tribes, and educational institutions. The available pool is $1 million. The minimum amount we ask that you put into your request is $100,000. The maximum amount you can request here is $200,000. Well, CDFIs also have another special emphasis category that they can apply for, and this does not apply to educational institutions, our tribes, or 501c3s. So you do have the option as a CDFI to also apply for additional CDFI and native CDFI support. The available pool here is $1 million. The minimum amount we request that you ask in your budget is $100,000. The maximum amount here is $400,000. So with our CDFI projects, we want them to focus on loan capital, re-granting capital, and technical assistance and business assistance. To give you some insight on current grantees that we fund that are CDFIs, we have Occupton, which is out of South Dakota, and they serve tribal borrowers to meet the agriculture needs of producers. Upon loan approval, if they do receive a loan through Occupton, these individuals receive technical assistance, business planning, and risk management tools. We also have a Northwest Native Development Fund out of Washington State. They provide financing to Native producers. They focus on really financing more Native-owned cattle operations and enhancing finance opportunities to producers within their region in the area. All right, we have targeted projects and we're moving into our tribes and instrumentalities. The available pool we have here is $1 million. The minimum amount we ask that you put into your program is $100,000. The maximum you can request in your application is $200,000. The special emphasis category that you are able to apply for if you're applying via a tribe is the climate and regenerative agriculture practices. The available pool here is $1 million. The minimum amount you can put into your application is $100,000. The maximum amount you can request is $200,000. And again, we hope to see projects come in that focus on business assistance, ag education, tech support, and/or advocacy services. So a tribe that we have, going back to region and what might be applicable to your region or your area, or is it servicing the entire country and that will be impacted by agriculture and your project? We have a tribal grantee coming from Maine, Passamaquoddy tribe. They had an eel project to support their native harvesters by stabilizing the market and increased ag-based employment. We also have a Washington State grantee, Sequamish Seafoods, who focused on harvesting gooey duck and clam, and then in turn packaging and distributing that to their local businesses and their local casinos. So agriculture, as we know, as most of you know, can look very different in areas. And we encourage you to really focus on the impact that you're going to be having in your region, in your area. We also have Kalispell Tribe out of Washington State, who they have a bison operation, and they're really working to expand training opportunities for their community in food processing and agricultural production. Okay, instrumentality. So you've heard us mention tribes and instrumentalities. So instrumentalities of tribes, state or federally recognized, can mean any number of things. So tribal governments have the latitude to determine which entities are instrumentalities of their governments. We only need proper documentation of that status. So if an organization wishes to be considered an instrumentality of a tribal government, the organization must secure and submit an authorizing document from that tribal government to that specific effect. So a statement from an organization other than a tribal government will not suffice for this purpose. So we stress that you provide the needed documentation from that tribal government that you are connected to. So just an important reminder, if you are a new applicant, we do require a limited waiver of sovereign immunity if you are applying for our funding as a tribal entity. There's no exceptions to this. It is needed. In the application process, there will be a note. If you click to apply as a tribe or instrumentality, there will be a note there about limited waiver of sovereign immunity. You must click this in order to move forward in the application process. We do not need the limited waiver of sovereign immunity during the application process. It's just an understanding on your end that we will need a limited waiver of sovereign immunity if your project is funded. So for us to be able to distribute the funding out to you for you to get your first installment, we would need the limited waiver of sovereign immunity signed and submitted to our back-end support team. So that's just a note. I know that there might be questions on whether or not you have to have this prior to applying. You do not. You just need to be aware that it is needed if you are to be funded. And then also a note here on industrial hemp, we only fund feasibility or market studies. So if your project is focusing on anything other than feasibility or market studies, it will not be funded. So just going in a little bit more detail of our sovereign immunity waiver. So Native American Agriculture Fund, we're a charitable trust created by the 2010 settlement of the Keep-Siegel versus Vilsack class action lawsuit. The settlement agreement provided for the distribution of grants to federal and state recognized tribal governments and their instrumentalities. So NAAF recognizes that tribes are immune from suit or action as a sovereign government, and that sovereign immunity is vital to the functioning of tribes and all of its subdivisions and subordinate bodies. The waiver of a tribe's immunity from suit or action is occasionally required when entering into certain transactions. The court-approved trust agreement that created NAAF contains a provision that requires tribal governments to provide this limited waiver of sovereign immunity in order to receive our NAAF grant funding. The reason for this requirement stems from NAAF serving as a fiduciary of the trust funds with a duty to protect its funds from fraud or gross mismanagement. For grant purposes, acceptable waivers of tribal sovereign immunity are limited to the amount of the NAAF grants and to the duration of the grant relationship. So that is also a question that will sometimes arise. This document is only applicable to your duration of your grant. If a tribe or tribal entity wants to accept NAAF's grant funding and must work with the tribe's legal counsel to adopt a waiver of sovereign immunity related to NAAF and a resolution for the tribal governing body. Tribal governments and instrumentalities must provide waivers and resolutions within 3 months of receiving their NAAF grant award. Failure to submit an executed waiver and accompanying resolution in a timely manner will result in forfeiture of any award amount. Both documents can be pre-approved by NAAF to expedite the effort. Getting your documents pre-approved will save time during the application and post-award period. So I really encourage, if you are applying via a tribe, that you read this, you bring this to your leadership, have them be aware that this will be necessary upon if you do receive funding from us. And we are happy to answer any questions that might come about. If your leadership has questions or concerns, you can direct them to our Grants At inbox, and we will get those questions sent to the proper individual. Our lawyer, Travis Trueblood, will be on our last webinar of this webinar series. That webinar will be held to answer questions that y'all might have very specific to the grant application process. And if you would like to invite your council to that webinar, they will be able to ask direct questions about the sovereign immunity waiver and get insight and direction on what it is that is needed, why it is needed. And so I encourage you to invite any council that you have to that last webinar of our webinar series. All right, youth programming. So all eligible entity types. So 501c3s, tribes or instrumentalities, educational institutions, and CDFIs are able to apply for our youth programming. We do have some grantees that apply for our general funding and also apply for our youth programming. Occupton, a CDFI, is one of those organizations that received both the general funding and then also put in an application for youth programming. The youth application is combined with a general application this year. So if you are a returning grantee or an individual who has gone through our application process, we are noting this year the youth is actually combined into that main application process within Foundant. So it makes it easier. You will not have to copy information over. It will streamline the process. The available pool we have this year for youth programming is $1 million. The minimum amount that we request you put into your program funding is $20,000. Maximum amount that you can apply for is $200,000. Our open date for our RFA this year, it opened on March 1st. Our close date is May 1st. In the past, youth programming projects may have opened and closed on separate dates, but they will be closing on the same date as our general application process. So May 1st, 2024 is the deadline. So I'm going to talk a little bit about evaluation criteria. So I noted at the beginning that we would go more in depth on impact on access to capital. So impact on access to capital holds 25% weight of your score when we review the applications. So we want to know, are you providing access to capital, or how is this project increasing access to capital, and what does that look like? We also focus 25% on proposed results and outcomes. We want to know, who is this impacting? Is this a greater impact? Is this a regional impact? Is this going to increase the amount of producers? Will this project build a data map? A data bank? Will this project increase youth access to farming and ranching efforts? So please, when you are applying for our funding, give us a bird's eye view of what this funding will be used for and how it's going to positively impact agriculture in Indian country. So we have farmer and rancher demand, 20% weight. Please look at data and show us how this is needed and why this is needed. What is the demand in your area? What is the demand in your region? As I shared some of the projects earlier, we talked about Washington State. Some of the programs were harvesting seafood. So what's the demand of seafood in your region, if that's specific to you all? We have some projects were harvesting pine nuts, and that was very detrimental food sovereignty programming to their communities. What does the demand look like, and how can this funding really amplify the need and help the need, amplify the outcome and help the need for these farmers and ranchers? We also look at team and organizational capacity and collaborators. That's a 10% weight. So who do y'all plan to help bridge gaps with? Who are you pulling in to collaborate with? Who did you talk to about potential, if you do receive this funding, about potentially collaborating with and serving your community with? And we also want to talk about evaluation. So that holds 10% weight. So thinking about in your application to us, sharing how are you planning on showing the growth or showing the expansion, showing the positives that this program and this project, how it's impacted your community? How are you evaluating that? What does that look like? You will be requested to provide summary reports to our compliance team, and my team member Lenora Moore will go over that in further slides. But we want to know in your reports, you're going to be providing that information. This project impacted X amount of farmers or X amount of youth or X amount of producers, and we're tracking that by utilizing this tool, by implementing this tool. So that's what we want to know there in evaluation. Innovation and replicability is 10% weight. Share with us how this is going to reach other communities and organizations that are interested in production, interested in farming and ranching, interested in food sovereignty. Is this something that other organizations can take and mirror? Can they make a sister program for that? We want to know exactly how it could be used by other individuals, because at the end of the day, that's something that really maximizes the ask here of and how we're able to really provide opportunities to farming and ranching communities. Application review. So when we go through your application, the components are outcome results-based projects, access to capital, budget and budget narrative, a grantee meeting, intermediary funds, resume of key personnel, cover letters, and support letters. So these are all things that will be incorporated into the application. So we need to know the outcome. We need to know how you're tying this back to access to capital. What does your budgeting look like along with your narrative? And we do provide, so when you go through our application process, these documents will be provided in there for you. So being able to add in your budget and your budget narrative, resume of your key personnel, who's on your team, who do you plan to have delivering these tasks and getting this work done. We encourage cover letters, and support letters are optional, but cover letters does give us a really great description of who you are and what it is that you're wanting to accomplish. Okay, so this is a really important note. There are now only 12 and 24-month projects. We have decided to eliminate 18-month projects. Grantees will now have the choice to pursue projects lasting either 12 or 24 months. Note that all grants retain the flexibility to complete their projects ahead of schedule. So in the past, we had our 18-month projects that you could gear your programming around, but this year we are only allowing 12 and 24-month projects. Just to note there too, the funding, if you were to receive if you were to apply for general funding and you wanted to apply for the maximum amount of the 200,000 and your project is only 12 months or your project is 24 months, that doesn't impact how much you can apply for. So we encourage you, if you're thinking you're having a 12-month project, to have your budget narrative and your budget outline depict if that's if you want to go for 12 years, or geez, Louise, 12 months, if you want to apply for our 12-month project, the 200,000 is still applicable to that 12-month project. I think that's a question we've had in the past was the length of your project, does that impact the amount of funding you can apply for? All right, now I'm going to pass it over to my teammate Lenora, where she will go over some budget notes and also go over the background of Foundant.
Thanks, Chanel. Hi, everyone. My name is Lenora Moore. I'm a compliance officer here at NAAF, and I'm a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. And so we wanted to give you a brief overview of what your application budget should look like and all of the points we need to cover for that. So for returning applicants and grantees, you may already know this, but NAAF has a specific budget template that must be used when applying for funds and also when providing update and progress reports of your grant. And included in that budget template is an indirect limit. So while NAAF allows indirect funds to be included in your grants, the limit is 15% of your personal and direct totals. So for example, if your personnel funds added up to 50,000 and your direct funds added up to 50,000, then you could use 15% of that total of 100,000 to spend towards indirect, but not more. This is especially good to note if your project will have intermediary funds, which covers scholarships, re-grants, or loans. Any funds in the intermediary category do not count towards your indirect limit. So please, whenever you're filling out your application budget, please remember to refer to our budget guidelines and just make sure that everything adds up correctly. As I mentioned, we ask all the applicants to follow the budget guidelines and use our templates. If your application does not include a NAAF budget template, that may impact your success. And applicants, applicants must abide by request minimums and maximums as listed in each category. And I just want to highlight some critical deadlines here. So I know we've told you once and we'll tell you again that our General and Youth 2024 RFA closes May 1st at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. And there is no opportunity to submit or edit an application after the deadline, so make sure you mark that on your calendars. So for our returning applicants, you should already have your login credentials for Foundant, which is our grant management system that we use. So if you have those credentials on hand, you can log on to your profile and go straight to apply for the new 2024 RFA. For any new applicants, you'll follow the directions here to create a new account and follow the prompts to set up your profile. So once your profile has been set up, or once you've logged into your existing profile, this will be your home screen, your dashboard that you'll see. And as you can see, it'll have your applicant information, your organization information, and any active or historical requests that you may have. And so Next, we'll show you exactly where to go to apply. And as you can see, up there at the very top, it has a apply button. And that will take you to a list of any active applications. And as you can see on this example, our 2024 request will opened on March 1st and it will close on May 1st. And it is the only open application we have. So all you have to do is click the apply button. And that will take you to this screen here, which is at the beginning of the application. And you'll go through the application, filling it out. And I do want to remind everyone that it is okay to work on this application in pieces. But just remember, every time you finish filling out a section, to save your application so you don't lose any of your progress. And when you are finished, please make sure you submit your application. All right, thank you for your time, and I'll hand.
Great, thank you all so much. I think now we're going to transition into our question and answer period. So myself and our team members, Director of Programs, Chanel Ford, we're going to start by go ahead and read aloud some of the questions that have already been submitted. And then we will also answer some of these live. We encourage you to submit your questions to the question and answer box. And then we will start first with, where can we send in any documents to have them pre-approved by NAAF? I think specifically this question was regarding pre-approved documents that are related to the limited sovereign immunity waiver. So we are going to show on our screen here in a moment. We have one email address we encourage you to complete communication with, which is grants@nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. Another member of our team will also put that into the chat box so you can have that to reference. But we do have staff members monitoring that inbox. So if you have any questions outside of this webinar, or if you'd like to get in touch with one of our team members, you can reach us there. Okay, Chanel, another question that came through is the evaluation criteria the same for all categories of applications for CDFIs, nonprofits, EDUs, and tribes? And the answer to that is yes. The evaluation criteria will be the same for all eligible entities. We do encourage you to make the case for your organization, though, and how that, for example, if you're thinking about how it addresses access to capital, how it meets farmer and rancher demand, it might be specific to your specific eligible entity. So making sure you're including as much information in that process as possible. Okay, and then Graham, I'm going to come to you with this question. So can we apply for multiple or all general and special focus categories? Or do we have to choose one area with a max $200,000 budget?
Thank you, Whitney. You are able to apply for one general category. So you can't apply for multiple general category projects, but you can apply for all special focus categories alongside that. Or just one, or you could do one special emphasis, one general, or 3 special emphasis, one general, stuff like that. Each project area has their own maximum and minimum amounts. And so if you applied for 2 projects, each with a max of $200,000, then you'd be applying for a maximum of $400,000, just to note. And note that each project must be able to stand alone and will be reviewed as such. You can have interrelated components, but they cannot be dependent on other projects getting funded, or else they would fail.
Thank you, Graham. Another question that came through was related to expanding on the definition and what we mean by access to capital. So at the beginning of the webinar, which I will also note that this webinar recording will, in addition to the slide deck, will be emailed to all attendees for this webinar, but it will also be archived and housed on the Native American Agriculture Fund website. So we'll include a link there. But yes, because of the central issues in the litigation that led to NAAF's creation involved access to capital, when Native American farmers and ranchers faced violations under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act due to not being able to access loans or poor loan servicing. NAAF requires that all applicants and the grants that we fund incorporate strategies that will improve access to capital by Native farmers and ranchers in their proposed activities. So access to capital can be shown by a few examples of activities, and that includes business assistance or market planning training, financial education, credit education for students, record keeping, credit repair activities, targeted credit application training, or technical support. It may be risk analysis or related activities to prepare Native farmers and ranchers as they seek capital to support their enterprises. So as we know, capital is always needed in agriculture enterprises and will always be relevant to those involved in food and agriculture. We do have a video that you can watch, and we encourage you to view. It's on access to capital. It expands that background a little bit more. It's included in all of our documents on our webpage. And here in a little bit, we'll go through and just do a quick tour of that webpage so you can know what's available there to you and what documents you can access. But in the meantime, I'm going to drop in the chat box a link to that access to capital video. All right. So another question that came through, Graham, I'll come to you with this one. Can youth projects be standalone without submitting a general focused application? If so, do youth projects also need to focus on access to capital?
Yes, youth projects can be standalone. You don't need to apply to it. There's no required any one project type that you have to apply to. You can definitely apply for youth projects standalone from everything else. Youth projects do need to have an access to capital component.
Thank you. Another question for you, Graham, that has come through. Are consultants included in direct cost totals when calculating indirect costs?
Consultants and contractors they have their own line item in the budget. They're represented in the direct costs category. So under direct costs is a line item for consultants and contractors. So any indirect costs agreed upon between the grantee and the contractor, that should be folded into that contractor consultant line item. And then indirect costs applied to your NAAF grant as a whole are a maximum of 15% applied to the personnel total plus direct cost total.
Great, thank you. We had another question here come through about a further explanation regarding the grantee convening that is already included in the budget template. It's listed for $1,000. So the grantee convening that NAAF requires for grantees is held on a rotating schedule. So successful 2024 grantees would be attending the convening that happens in the year 2025. This would be an in-person convening, and the funds that you set aside in your template, in the budget template that's required, would go towards that travel cost associated with the person from your organization that would be attending. Another question here, Graham, that came through is it required that objectives be SMART goals?
It's not a requirement, but I will say that the SMART goal and objective format is an effective way to frame what you want to do with your project. If you have additional questions or want to see more about our specific eligibility criteria, I recommend reading NAAF's RFA overview, which you can find on our website.
Great. We also had a question about if someone's applying for a general category and a special focus category, they asked if they could use one budget form to complete it. So you would actually need those two separate budget forms because they are separate applications. Another question that came through. If they're awarded a 24-month grant, will they be eligible to apply for new grants in 2025? So yes, if you were awarded for 2024, you would be eligible to apply in 2025 as long as you are in compliance as a current NAAF grantee, but also if your next proposed project is not the exact same as the previous one you were funded for in 2024. So it has to be either an extension or a next phase of the project you submitted in 2024 or an entirely new project.
Can I add to that one, Whitney?
Yes, absolutely. Please do.
So for an example of that, say you applied for a scholarship for Native youth in ag programming. As long as it's, you wanted to keep that program going or, try to get on the path of self-sustainability, you have to address that this would be a new cohort of students. It just can't be the same students or impacting the same people. It would just have to be a continuation of the project as the next phase. So I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Cindy. All right, another question that came through. Would technical support and resources towards land access, such as leasing or title transfer, be a way to support access to capital? So that is a great question. I don't know if Chanel, you're on. I don't know if you're able to unmute or not. But if not, essentially, kind of reiterating what I had said before, access to capital can be improved by a variety of ways, and that includes improved access to technology, improved record keeping skills, those credit repair activities. If it would ultimately increase the access to capital for producers. Graham, I don't know if you also have any thoughts on this as it relates to land access, leasing, or title transfer specifically.
No extra thoughts.
Okay, great. So if you want to I'll make sure you take a look at the access to capital video. And I'll get your information here and we'll also follow up with you. If you have something specific in terms of the project there, we'll make sure to follow up. So another question that came through. Is a grant set up to be reimbursable? Graham?
Thank you. So the primarily no, but we do hold 10% back. And the way that we set up our grants and payments is that if you are a 24-month 501c3, for example, then upon execution of your grant agreement, you get 50% of your granted amount up front, and then an additional 40% upon completion of your annual report, and then that report is reviewed and accepted by NAAF, and then you get that next 40%. The final 10% is sent to you after your project has wrapped up. The final report has been submitted and it is reviewed and approved by NAAF. So the first 90% is not set up to be reimbursable. It is submitted to you initially, effectively. And then the final 10% is set up to be reimbursable. And I also want to thank Cindy Farley for helping me with that question.
Great, thank you, Graham. One other question that came through is, does an organization need a certain amount of capital to qualify for the grant? And the answer is no, you do not need a specific amount of upstart capital to apply for our funding. Another question coming to you, Graham. If an organization is not a CDFI, but they're still an eligible entity for NAAF funding, could they include regranting to community farmers in their grant project?
Absolutely. And all eligible entity types are allowed to do regranting.
And I encourage you to, if you're looking for past grant project examples, you're more than welcome to go to our website. We have listed on there the people that have been funded in previous years from 2019 through 2023. You can look at some of those examples, but also you can see how maybe some of them relate to a project you're looking to propose, but maybe it's different for a region that you're serving, or maybe a different audience or stakeholder group that you're looking to support. Okay. Another question for the team here. Could you provide some examples that define differences in the different general focus areas, such as business assistance, agricultural education, technical support, and/or advocacy services? I think we could probably all team up here and think of some good examples for you.
If I may, I've got a few just on the top of my head. So for example, a business assistance could be something like financial literacy education, something like that, something that increases the ability of that operation to do better business. Agricultural education could be more on the ground, teaching, doing workshops with farmers and giving them support there, or perhaps vice versa, farmers doing workshops and educating youth. And then technical support could be more specific support, such as assisting with getting tractors or getting equipment. And advocacy services would be supporting advocacy from the side. We can't do advocacy itself, but we are happy to fund advocacy services, things that serve advocacy.
And that could be in forms of research, education. That could also be in data implementation, data sets, or we fund an organization that has an incredible dashboard of data that identifies different land use and agricultural production on native lands, how that helps in different decision points for producers, even thinking about like technical support. Some examples there. We have a grantee that is able to provide a mobile unit for horse farriers. So they're able to help go out to really remote areas and help educate those producers on how to care for and do horseshoeing. That helps reduce a significant cost for producers in those rural areas because they help provide equipment in that project, and they help provide the education on how to do it. So that is a reoccurring cost that they no longer have to incur handle on their own, because they now have the tools and the knowledge to be able to do that and increase their capacity to sustain their horses for longer periods of time.
I have one to add to, Whitney. Just thinking of one of our local Pacific Northwest grantees. They have a bison operation, and they are able to educate their community on harvesting the bison, the benefits of what that might look like if you're a producer, and getting interest and input on planning for the future for a processing facility that they are actually going to be building on their reservation, setting community members up to get them interested and educated on how to really make farming and ranching a career.
Thank you, Chanel. Another question that came through is, can they use the general focus to conduct a feasibility study? So yes, that is possible. Janelle, I'll let you jump in here too. Yeah. But just as a reminder that if you're looking to use any general focus funding for hemp, that is only limited to the feasibility and market studies.
Yeah, you are able to utilize general focus funds for feasibility studies. I know there were some questions about funding in terms of if we are a current grantee, can we apply for, if you're funded in 2024, can you apply for 2025 or 2026? Often we've had grantees that have utilized the funding, the initial general funding to do a study to find the impact. And then their next go round, their next application was to do the work, was to build a plan, or was to follow through on the plan that they had created from that feasibility study in the prior year of their funding. So yes.
Great, thank you. Another question here coming to you, Graham, is if an educational organization is applying for grant funding, do they have to submit the following information to prove their Section 170B status, IRS letter, their statement from the organization's general counsel, and other incorporating documents?
So you do not have to submit all of them. Each of those are just an example of one document that you could submit to confirm your eligibility. So just examples.
Thank you, Graham. Okay, great. Chanel, I'm coming to you with this one here. Another question. It's just kind of an example. Maybe someone's looking to do something like a barn restoration. Would that be considered for NAAF funding?
As long as it is going to be supporting farm operation, or it's going to directly impact agricultural projects in your region, then yes, we have had some instances where our grantees, one specifically that comes to mind is a grantee we have in Arizona, where they were restoring some of their areas to keep their livestock, and they were harvesting the livestock as part of their project, but they needed to restore the facility where their livestock was kept. So as long as it's can tie directly back to how it's supporting agriculture or livestock or production, producing, then yes.
Thank you, Chanel. And I think that also applies to the question about if there's a request for funding to support building repair and renovation for, the key area in supporting farm operations, such as housing seed and other supplies and winter equipment storage. Essentially, is that repair goal eligible for funding? And I think to Chanel's point, as long as it does go back to increasing or improving, enhancing operations and services for those producers in the area. How do you tie that back to increasing access to capital in a sense of how does this support them and how does it meet farmer and rancher demand? So another question, how helpful might it be to include support letters in the application? Chanel?
This is actually a great question. We do share in our RFA overview the partnerships and support letters. Those are read by our team, and it's really nice to know who you're partnering with. It's great to know who you've already built a relationship with, who you might be bridging gaps with. Please do put those into your application so that we have a better understanding of where it is that you are in terms of collaborative efforts and where you plan to go with that in your if your project so chooses to do so. So I think it's very helpful to include those support letters.
Just to jump in there too, it isn't required, it is an optional part of the application, but like Chanel said, it really gives a good insight as to your partnerships, your current partnerships, and those who you wish to partner with in the future to help with your project. And I would recommend too that if they are heavily involved in your project, it would be great to have one, but again, it's not required.
And I think also it helps set a helpful framework for evaluators as we go through the evaluations of the grants and the applications, just because you may have someone who is maybe less familiar with the work of your organization or the work of your partner organizations. And so that really does help provide more context. So another question that came through, this is regarding tribes and eligibility. So if a tribe is still recovering from post-COVID and still working on a fiscal 2022 audit, will this affect eligibility?
Graham, you could, I was going to say you could provide maybe a little bit more insight, but I was going to share that I don't think it's going to impact fully your eligibility as long as you can, in the pre-process, show that you're in good standing and that you are trying to move forward in that phase and in that process. But Graham, you can shed some more light on that if you have.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it won't affect your eligibility to apply. What I will say is that your finances and such will be reviewed. And so if you're working on your 22 audit, just note that we might ask you to submit some other types of financial information to help us gain a better, more cohesive picture of what your financial situation is like. So I'd still recommend applying and all that good stuff, but just note that we might do a bit more of a review depending on what is submitted in the application.
Great, thank you, team. So another question that came through is re-granting limited to CDFI general focus grants. Can they be included in a 501c3 application, for example, as a part of their intended collaborative efforts with other tribes? So re-granting is not limited only to CDFIs as general focus grants, and other organizations are able to re-grant. Another question. An example, I think specifically an idea for a project, would using buffalo to regenerate the land be suffice for grant application?
If I may, yeah, I'd say that there's the primary thing is just ensuring that it ties back to how there is an increase in access to capital for native producers.
And also on that one too, just showing kind of the dual effect that regenerative ag has, and kind of, I think, a dual purpose that that specific question would serve, or that specific project would serve. Elaborating more on that in that application would be really helpful.
Thank you, all. And I actually want to, that brings up a good point, some other things I want to run through here on the screen as you all are submitting any other questions you have to the question and answer box. I'm going to share my screen. And first I'm going to run through the web page for our request for application. So here's our home page at nativeamericanagriculturefunds.org. And right at the top of the page, you'll see an opportunity to click, and this will take you to a really useful full web page full of our documents, our important links, but also frequently asked questions. So you can scroll through here. You're able to download this helpful document. It's called the 2024 RFA overview document. So essentially what we've been discussing in this webinar, you can scroll through, review eligible entities, addressing access to capital, other information about unallowable use of funds, limitations on indirect costs, etc. So this is a really great place to start. So I encourage you to download that as you begin your process. You can also view the link to apply via our grant system, which is the Found system. And this will take you to the login information that Lenora was covering earlier in the webinar portion. You can also view the application questions for both general and youth ahead of time. So you can download all of those questions and fill out your answers and know what you need in terms of documents ahead of time. We have different checklists here. We have downloadable documents from the budget templates to budget guidelines, sample budgets and budget narratives. even down to how to reduce PDF file size if you feel like your file is too large to upload to Foundant, or even if you have any of those technical questions, you can always reach out to our team at grants@nativeamericanagriculturefunds.org. You also see a number of video tutorials here, especially when it comes to filling out some of those budget templates and budget narratives. You could also scroll down and see what are some of the most frequently asked questions as it relates to applicant eligibility, different definitions, project content. It could also answer questions as it relates to the application process, the budget and financial pieces of the application, intermediary organizations, questions about our review process and evaluation criteria, different information pieces about the grant itself. And then we also like to go in here and add the questions that come through each of our webinars throughout this 2-month period. So if you want to reference back to any of the questions you may have asked today, we'll make sure to have your answers here posted on the website. But as you scroll down to the very bottom, you will also be able to reference where the recordings of the webinars are. So this is all of our past webinars. You can download the slides themselves. And we also have, just to remind you folks looking to apply for specific youth funding, that we had a very specific youth webinar that goes through that application. So that's a really helpful resource for you there. And since we had a question about regenerative agriculture, I just wanted to give one quick shout out to an event we have coming up next week on April 17th and 18th. So it's going to be a virtual conference. It's called Cultivating Conservation in Indigenous Agriculture Summit. It's going to be for the second half of each day on April 17th and 18th. So the goal of this summit is to really gather a lot of our folks to talk about the intersection of capital, agriculture, and conservation. So we'll have a number of panels you'll get to choose from throughout the day, even ranging from topics of implementing alternative funding arrangements through USDA NRCS, to building communication strategies as it relates to conservation and agriculture, or utilizing data and what that looks like for decision makers or even producers, how they use data to inform things like drought mitigation. So it's just a wide range of topics. We definitely encourage you to attend. This is on our website. We will also drop a link to this in our chat box. If you're interested in attending, you can register on this page. But one more thing, and then we'll get back to our questions here, is another opportunity for funding. This is a request for applications through another organization called the Sovereign Equity Funds. NAAF is a founding funder partner for establishing Sovereign Equity Funds, but they have their own request for applications for tribal colleges and universities. And it's called the Cultural Foodways Fund. And this is initially funded in partnership with the Mellon Foundation. But what this request for application looks like is really about the humanities side of Native food and agriculture. And so tribal colleges and universities are eligible for that. The request amount that those tribal colleges and universities would be eligible for are $200,000. But this is really, again, focused on the artistic, cultural, and humanistic aspects of Native foodways. So looking at how traditions and ceremonies, storytelling, belief systems, and customs are intertwined into those Indigenous foodways. So I hope that was helpful run through for you all. I'm going to go back to our request for applications homepage here, and then we can get back to our questions. Okay. Have I missed any questions that have come through, team?
Nope, you look good on my end.
Okay, great. Okay, well, unless anybody has any more questions, I believe our team will stick around for 2 more minutes. And otherwise, you can hop off, but we appreciate your time for today. As a reminder, our next webinar will just be question and answer focused. We will also have our attorney on the line. So if you have specific questions as it relates to, for example, tribal sovereign immunity waivers or any specific documentation, please, we encourage you to attend that and submit your questions there. But if you have any questions in the meantime, email that grants@nativeamericanagriculturefund.org email address on the screen. You can also give us a phone call at 479-445-6226. But thank you all so much for your time today, and we appreciate you being here, and we look forward to reading your applications.
Whitney, we have one more question here in the question and answer section.
Yes, okay. That question is for a youth grant. Is the age limit strict? For example, are thinking about a project for pre-college programs in which some recent graduates may be 19 years of age. So essentially how NAAF defines youth, for the youth funding, it really take a broad approach to defining that audience targeted for the youth category. And we're interested in how various Native communities view it. So typically those participants in youth programs will be that early childhood to 18 years old, but we encourage you to make a clear case on how your project will define youth.
I'll jump in here too, Whitney. If they're recent graduates, I believe under our definition, it still includes, like Whitney said, K through 12. So if they're 19 but recently graduated high school, I would think that it would still be applicable under the youth.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all so much for your time, and we will be in touch with you all soon. Thank you.